Hello.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to this first look exploring session, continuing our epic journey through or in this particular instance, the most joyful, royal and magnificent meeting between our most dread sovereign James, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France and Ireland, Defender of the Faith, etc., and the Christian IV, King of Denmark, Norway, Gothland and Vandals, Duke of Swelsvik, Holst, Stormacht, Wagner, Ditchmark, Count of Oldenburg and Delmenhurst, etc., and brother to our most gracious Queen Anne upon the river of Thames near unto Gravesend on Friday the 18th of July, anno 1606. So yes, it's another royal entry of the King of Denmark. We've done 2 videos on this so far, and this is going to be our 3rd, and there's probably going to be a 4th. We don't know how much material will stretch. There might be more material. There's a lot of material. Not all of it's in English, so we may spare you our stumbling through Latin in future sessions. But yes, we are going to have a little stumble through this discourse. For this particular account is written in a discourse from a gentleman to a friend of his in the northern parts. So that's something to look forward to. Together with the manner of the 2 kings coming to Greenwich, the entertainment there and in other places, and their most pompous passage through the city of London. Because, of course, we do royal entry things. We look at Lord Mayor shows. We look at civic pageantry in general. And so what I should do here, if I remember to do it, is throw up on the back of, throw up over my screen here, our special royal entry Lord Mayor show route. Now, this isn't absolutely on point for all of the route, because sometimes the routes and the gates they use and the direction they come from is slightly different. But yes, we have the City of London on the Thames there, and there will be a general move through, and at some point going via Cheapside, because that's your biggest thoroughfare where all the exciting things happen. Yes, I may throw that up later again to give a better sense of things. We're a relatively small room we have in the room with us today. We have Tom, we have Eric, I am Robert, and we also have, invisible to the video viewing public at home, Tracey Hill, author of Pageantry and Power and many other important terms and works on civic pageantry. Say hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Excellent. I didn't even set that joke
Hello.
up. That's nicely done. So we're going to have a read through the text, and we're going to see how it all goes. So I'm going to start off, then it's Eric, then it's Tom, and then we'll see where we go from there. Sir, albeit all out of mine own disposition, as well as out of the difficulty of these times, which from a late customary title have taken unto themselves a more large patent of misconstruing men's words or misapplying their meanings, however it favour of a virtuous innocency, than have been exercised in the days of our forefathers, I have been ever a most unwilling news-sender. Yet, considering the threefold blessings which, like a divine embroidery, makes our nation most admirable, both in the eyes and ears of all domestic and foreign people, to wit, a king holy and magnanimous, royal issue and prosperous, and imperial alliance faithful and invincible, have at this present so inflamed both my heart and eyes, the latter with admiration, the first with a deep and weighty consideration. How abundantly we are to praise the majesty of majesties, who to the days of our peace hath added these joyful and not formerly heard of hours of our most unspeakable happiness, wherein we are blessed to behold our nation governed by so puissant a king, who with his birthright and inheritance hath brought us peace without limitation, which albeit before we enjoyed in our bosoms, yet we wanted in our garments, succession to our state, such as confound all the thoughts.
Of the ambitious and that affinity, concord, and alliance, which hath not only taken from envy her sting, but even given to the worst fear a most valiant and resolved courage, nay, more, to behold a stranger king. Stranger, I mean, as to her eyes and the distance of kingdoms, however the nearest of all great ones in blood and friendship. A king, I say, blessed with all the felicities of power, peace, and fertility. Not to send his love, but to bring his love. Not to protest by the mouth of others, but to witness with his own words. Not to give us hope what he will be, but to assure us in himself what he is. As it is an example, exceeding all examples of blessedness beyond the compass of memory, and an instance, however imitable in part, yet in both with heart and voice, the memory of the royal king of Denmark's coming to our kingdom, and even teach it to our children, from generation to generation, that even till the last day it may be kept as fresh in men's mouths and ears as it is this present, and that succeeding ages who shall but hear the name of our royal queen Anne, from whose happy conjunction is descended both the felicity and all others which our children and children's children shall hereafter hope for, may with the poet say, O quam te memoriam Virgo, O dea certe.
From these considerations, accompanied with this so strange, though long wished for and most happy meeting of our king and his dearest brother, the King of Denmark, I was stirred up to write you such particulars as either myself particularly noted or was received from others, which were eyewitnesses.
So we've done the throat clearing of this particular document. Which is basically, isn't the king great? The king's great, isn't he wonderful? And isn't it great that these things happen? And then closing with this sort of setting out of saying, well, I didn't see everything, but I did get some stuff from other eyewitnesses. And yeah, setting up this thing, as said earlier, it's a discourse from a gentleman to a friend. So he's written a letter to his mate up north saying how great it all was and how great the king is. Any thoughts from the room, Tracey?
I'm not sure. It is just grovelling, actually. I think maybe he's trying too hard, but there's something kind of slightly problematic about the way he's sort of trying to argue about James's legitimacy and all that kind of stuff. He sort of introduces doubt where he probably wants to reinforce certainty. It seems to me it's a kind of funny little passage, really. I mean, the device of having somebody write to a friend on the other side of the country to tell them something that's happened recently is fairly well established by now, obviously. It happens quite a lot in the late 16th, early 17th centuries. But there's something, I kind of raised an eyebrow when I read that, shall we say.
Well, so far it hasn't given us any data onto actually what happened on the day. So I think we'll move on. The throat clearings are interesting, but they're not necessarily always helpful. But it gives us a context, true or otherwise. So we will move on to things what happened. The 17th day of July, being Thursday, the King of Denmark, with about 7 goodly tall ships, sailing along the coast of England, came towards the evening up to the river of Thames, over against Gravesend, where he cast anchor. And notice being given to our king, whose court was then at Greenwich, being 4 mile from London, his majesty sent of certain principal account down to Gravesend to the king. But night being come, the watch in orderly and warlike sort set, the King of Denmark slept that night aboard his ship.
The next day, being the 18th of July, and Friday, our king, attended by the Prince of Wales and Duke of Lennox, the Earl of Nottingham, Lord Admiral, the Earl of Suffolk, Lord Chamberlain, and divers other earls, barons, knights, pensioners, and esquires, to the number of some 5 or 36 barges, or thereabouts, took his majesty's barge and went down to Gravesend, where first the noblemen went aboard the King of Denmark's ship and were most graciously received. After them the young prince, whom the king culled and embraced most lovingly in his arms, expressing a most tender and royal affection. Then came our king himself, between whom and the King of Denmark passed such embraces, such words, and such royal accompaniments of most inviolable and inexpressible affection that I am neither able to conceive it nor worthy to deliver it, such words and thoughts being fit for no meaner bosoms.
The ship wherein the King of Denmark went was a most goodly and famous vessel, and as some shipmen reported, about the burden of 10 or 1200 ton. She bore in her 3 tier of ordnance, all brass, both great and large. Her poop, her forecastle, and her beakhead were all fair carved and richly gilt. So were the portholes of her pieces, her tops, topmasts, and other places, her flags, streamers, and pennants were all blue and white. In her waist and upper works stood a guard of harquebuses, all in blue doublet, white hats with blue and white bands, cassocks and breeches made neat our English fashion, all of the blue cloth and stripped thick with blue and white silk lace, blue stockings and yellow silk garters. Upon the top of the poop stood about 14 trumpeters, besides drummers, all in white hats, with bands embroidered with gold, white satin doublets, laid with watchet silk and silver lace, their hose of watchet branchet velvet, and laid with watchet silk and silver lace, their cloaks of blue cloth, guarded about with 5 or 6 guards of watchet velvet, and laid on with watchet silk and silver twist, their trumpets all silver and fair gilt, their brand rolls of watchet silk and silver, and fair banners containing the king's arms.
Just going to pause there because we've already obviously read an account. The previous 2 sessions are a straight through account of the visit, and the details are very, very similar. This one gives slightly more detail on all of the what everyone is wearing, but it's not dissimilar to the version by Henry Roberts that we had before, talking about the size of the ship. They're much more interested in the actual size of the ships and details there, but we get the same detail of colours: white hats, blue silk, gold bands. So I mean, it's nice when you get accounts that are basically agreeing with each other. So increasingly, the question of what actually happened does sort of start, narrowing down more. But this one's very interested in the fashions. Thoughts in the room? Anyone want to leap in? Getting details. I'm confused what day it is. Just before I go to everyone else, because I've got. Oh no, we are okay. 17th was a Thursday. No, I got Thursday was a 16th in the other account. So apart from that, I'll double check. That may just be a transcription error. I'm not sure what day of the week it is. I'll go to Tom then, Eric.
Simply, what's a watchet?
Tracey might be able to give better chapter and verse on that.
Watchet is a kind of fabric they use a lot in pageantry. It's often used for costumes because it's quite glittery, glittery-ish anyway. So it's intended to be something that you can kind of see from a distance.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, also, if Liza were here, I'm sure Liza would be able to tell us about all of those details. And when we return to this and try and conflate all of these accounts together into a separate account, then I'm sure there'll be an awful lot on that. Eric?
I was just amused by the sort of the king of the sort of encounter between the king and the king of England and the king of Denmark was like so mind blowing that it cannot be reproduced. It's just like so out there, so awesome to put it in our English, modern English. That it's kind of it is not fit for meaner bosoms. It's like I wasn't there, but it was amazing, dude. You should have been there.
Yes, we and specific. I mean, it's not name dropping. It's it's the important personages who are there. We're getting these lists of people, and again, cross referencing who's there and not. Any additional thoughts? Otherwise, we'll read on and get some more data.
I guess it's just worth pointing out that the prince referred to there is, of course, Henry, not Charles.
Yes, Henry, the great hope of of the future, who sadly does not last long. We don't know. History does not recall what might have happened. So let us carry on in the similar fashion to before. Nearer to the king's person, and as it were in nature of our king's guard of gentlemen pensioners, stood a great sort of handsome gentleman, with fair halberds in their hands, white hats with gold embroidered bands, cassocks and breeches of watchet velvet, guarded thick with a broad waist of watchet silk, silver and gold, their cassocks lined through with changeable taffeta watchet and crimson, white satin doublets laid with watchet silk and silver lace, gilt rapiers and daggers, and in general every man's apparel made near to our present English fashions. Then were there about 4 young youths, the king's pages, in white hats, with gold-embroidered bands, doublets, and hose of watchet silk, satin, laid with silver lace, and cloaks of watchet cloth, guarded with some 4 guards of watchet velvet, and laid on with watchet silk and silver twist. Divers other inferior officers there were in watchet cloth cloaks, guarded with watchet velvets.
The next of all to the king's person were about 6 very grave, ancient, and worthy persons of his majesty's privy council. Next them stood about some 20 or above, gallant and brave gentlemen, some of his majesty's bedchamber, some appertaining to his highness person into her near offices.
In all,
Carry on, Tom.
In all and of all sorts, there were attendant upon the King of Denmark, accepting and admitting sailors, and such whose offices were only at sea. The whole number, as it was faithfully reported, came to 314 or thereabouts.
314 approximately. It might have been 15, might have been 13. I think that's a fair number. Eric and Tom read the next one. So Eric and then Tom, please.
After the kings had been privately together a good space, and that accompaniments and other entertainments on shipboard were ended, the 2 famous kings came forth together, and our king presented to the king of Denmark his own prime barge, which barge was made in fashion of a tower or little city, all close, with glass windows and casements fair carved and gilt and wrought with much art. The roof of it was made with battlements, pinnacles, pyramids, and fine imagery. It was towed by another barge, which was about some 30 oars and about. Into this barge went the king of Denmark, our king, the young prince, and some others of the most especial account, both of Denmark and England. Into other barges, and their boats appointed for the purpose, were the rest of the king of Denmark's train received.
As soon as the 2 kings were in the barge, not only that ship wherein the King of Denmark himself went, but also all the rest fly all their ordnance in most gallant sort, even to the amazement of the air and delight of the beholders.
Okay, we'll pause there. So we get mentioned, there's some slightly slippery language potentially here. After the kings had been privately together a good space, and that accomplishment and other entertainments on shipboard were ended. I'm assuming that entertainments in this context are more probably just toasting and things. I don't recall in the other account that we got any list of sort of formal entertainments in a more purposeful fashion. So I'm assuming that's just sort of drinks and nibbles.
They probably would have had music in the background. It's pretty standard.
Yeah, but I don't recall, let's say, that in the other account that we really got any mention of that specifically, though it might have been the bit that was slightly damaged. So, but I don't see anything. We definitely then get to the barges. And of course, which barge was made in fashion of a tower or little city, and we've seen that as a motif in things before, I don't recall whether that's mentioned in the other account, so I could be wrong. I'm just going to scry through it now and see if I can find it. Any reference to that on the barge. I'm trying to think of any specific pageantry where we've seen that on barges, but I think there might be some, but I can't off the top of my head remember.
They did invariably have musicians on kind of livery company barges for Lord Mayor's Day. Normally only a handful, maybe 3 or 4. Possibly just the drum and flute and 5, depending on what kind of resources they had.
Yeah, I'm just wondering to say about the castle-like structure on this barge. This tower or little city. I'm just wondering whether that's made specially for the occasion or whether they've used it from somewhere else. Can't see it in the other account, but I could have just missed it. In the other account, we've definitely got noise of trumpers after the sea manner.
There's a bit of a hiatus with Lord Mayor's Day in that period, actually. I mean, there's the Monday 1605 one, but there are no pageant books surviving from then until 1609. That's only partial, so it's a bit hard to say, actually.
Yeah, shame. Oh well, we'll have to dig into other things to see what we can find. Okay, any other thoughts on this this so far? We're doing some barges. We're barging about. Okay, we'll read on. I'm going to take a reasonably long chunk it here because this is all a bit involved. Then we'll go to Eric when I give you the nod, and then we'll go to Tom. Now, it is to be noted, by the way, that the ship wherein the King of Denmark went was castle-like. It's like they knew I was asking the question. Divided into every office and place of state as great chamber, presence chamber, privy chamber, etc., and those chambers very richly hung with hangings of state, and ordered according to the dignity of the places, in manner aforesaid. The 2 kings with both their trains, which did even, as it were, almost cover the Thames, rode up to Greenwich, where they landed at the King's Stairs, where the water being somewhat too low, there was a long table laid from the stairs to the barge to land upon, where our king, out of his great grace, love, and royalty, gave the King of Denmark the first place, and right hand. When they were both landed, our king, with most loving and tender embracements, gave, as it seemed to us that were their admirers, their most kind welcome to his dearest brother. And so, as it were, arm in arm, the nobles and gallants of England and the like of Denmark going 2 and 2 together before the kings, they matched from the water stairs to the great gate of the court, and so up to the great hall and the stairs, into the great chamber, thence into the presence, and so into the privy chamber, from whence it may be supposed the 2 kings went to the Queen's Majesty's chamber, who as then had laid in about some fortnight or more, there being nothing more to be desired either of her Majesty or her royal brother than the sight of each other. However it was, what love, what accomplishments, what repetitions of natural affections passed between them, is not for vulgar minds to imagine, sith none but so great hearts know them.
On Saturday in the morning, being the 19th of July, the 2 kings attended with divers noblemen and others, ride to Eltham Park hard by Greenwich, where his Majesty hath a very fair house, and there they hunted and killed bucks, and so returned to the court of Greenwich to dinner, where our king feasted the King of Denmark most royally in lodgings appointed for the King of Denmark, being the 2 great towers and galleries within the tilt yard, which were so well marshalled and contrived that neither the numbers to be received found disease, the attendance trouble, nor the number of vain gazers, in which our nation is more rich than any kingdom, want of their foolish eyes satisfaction, than for the accots and cheer, flesh, fish, fowl, beer, ale, and wines of all sorts. It was so royally superabundant that neither malice nor detraction could say, but it was most worthily magnificent. And by the way, that's in that so great a feast, where liberality with an open hand threw enticing baits of surfeit abroad, which might even have drawn temperance itself to have erred in his own disposition, I gathered and observed this note, that however the kingdom of Denmark hath in precedent times been either commended or accused for the free-hearted entertainment or too great delight to drink, Yet these, I mean, the meaner sort of this royal king's followers in whomever is soonest discern the common error, the most common error, did show at this great feast where they could but wish and have it effected. Nay, where many men of many nations I know would have esteemed it more barbarous to have refused drink than disgrace to be drunk. Such discreet temperance, refusing with such modest courtesy, and shunning surcharge with such pleasing affability that in my conceit they exceeded the fucus pressed Italian. Sure I am, for our own nation, I have neither at home nor abroad seen them more modest, I may well say not so respective, nay, into such a belief and expectation that had former reports drawn me, that their first abstinence I imputed to inacquaintance, fear of disgrace, and severity of more temperate governors. But when I saw all those obstacles reconciled and freedom lent into the freeness of their freedom lent into the freeness of their natures, I saw them continue their good carriage and peaceful modesty under such a constant rule that the meanest might sometimes be an example to some of ours that have or sue for much higher places.
After dinner was ended and some time spent between the two kings in private, the King of Denmark came down through the privy gardens into the tennis court, where he sat and saw divers sets played at the tennis between a French gentleman and one Webb, an English gentleman. And because I had in that tennis court, by reason that I stood a good space opposite against his majesty, a perfect and full view of him, I will, as near as I can, deliver to you on his description according to mine own conjecture.
We'll pause there before he describes the king. This is doing lots of really interesting things, and I'm quite fascinated by some of the details. I love the way he's sort of going, well, you know, the people around here, you know, in our country, they really like gawping at things. And the end of this little brief passage, he's just going, I got really close to the king. And I'm sort of going, you're not seeing that there is a similarity of behaviour here. And this whole thing about temperance and drinking, that we got this never-ending sort of, and I think going back to Tracey's point at the beginning, if it's almost like this person is starting a thought and then ties themselves in knots and going, oh, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, kind of thing. Is that what's going on here? Because it does feel like somebody's letter, actually. It doesn't feel like a conceit. It feels like somebody's sort of stream of consciousness at times.
It does appear someone's got a very big spade. doesn't know when to stop.
No. Eric?
It also sounds like very expensive, just all the stuff that this person is describing. I mean, obviously we talked about it in other sessions, but it's just like sort of this overabundance of stuff. Which makes me think, well, because also at the beginning we were told that it's a letter to a northern friend. So there's a part of me going, clearly, like sort of someone perhaps who's either Scottish or somewhere near the borders. So someone who would have been in favor of the king, perhaps, trying to make like this big celebrity impression. I don't know. It's just kind of...
Yeah. But he's really not sure whether he approves or disapproves of things.
Yeah.
So he keeps vacillating one into the other in really interesting ways. We get more detail on this castle on the barge, and they've sort of recreated the structure of the royal court. That you have these sort of inner chambers. It's almost like you're keeping the King of Denmark in a mini court until you can get him to court. It's like transporting some sort of wild animal. You put in the foliage and the things that they're used to, and then once you get to the wherever you're taking it, then you can release it, and it will feel like it never left. I'm being very obsequious. I apologise, Tom.
I thought it was very interesting that I know that where they could but wish and have effective ways that many men of many nations. Forgive me, I know would have esteemed it more barbarous to have refused drink then disgraced to be drunk. So, I mean, he's saying that the King of Denmark is commented or accused of free-hearted entertainment or too great delight in drink. And then says, well, to refuse a drink is more barbarous than to the disgrace of being drunk. So there's a nice sort of like manners going on there, that it's all right to be drunk in the face of rather than to refuse a drink.
That's the line I'm going to use every opportunity, I think. I think it's the way he's sort of verging on the edge of national stereotypes, and just sort of slightly pulls back from it. Because, of course, on the continent, the English had, well, no, James is not English, but the English had a terrible reputation for drunkenness. And I imagine by the time James has been on the throne for 3 years, as he has now, people were very aware that he liked to drink as well. So, yeah, as you say, there's quite a lot going on here.
Yeah, and then we will sort of zoom into the detail that this is a visit of family visit, and that they're going to the Queen's Majesty's chamber, who has been has given birth recently, and is it's a difficult time for her, and all these little details of things, what people said to each other in private, as opposed to then the public stuff, and then of course details of they go into the gardens and play tennis. So it's all these little details flying in. Eric.
I just like to think that the bit about like the King of Denmark talking to his sister is basically like, okay, I didn't really understand what they were saying because they were speaking Danish, but you have to imagine what was happening at that point, because it just like it leaves a lot of space for how do you call it, speculation there. Just sort of, okay, they walked upstairs and talked to his sister, and probably not in a tongue that is English at the time.
Okay, shall we find out what the king looks like? We're all dying to know, aren't we? Eric, and then Tom, and then I'll step in.
First, for His Majesty's stature, it is tall, but not of the tallest sort of men. Such as a man should make a question of a taller, but of that mediocrity of tallness which is most pleasing in the eye. And sorry, I'm just laughing at Rob's reaction.
Yeah, he's digging that hole, isn't he?
And senses of the best sorry, but of that mediocrity of tallness which is most pleasing in the eye, and sense as of the best judgment. His hair is of a whitish brown, his beard somewhat whiter than his beard. Okay, his beard whiter than his beard. No, it's strange.
Oh yes, that's a good hair presumably whiter than his beard, but
somewhat
check
whiter.
that.
Yeah, his cheeks he keepeth smooth without hair. His hair upon his chin about 3 fingers long, cut of an even cut. In his cheeks he hath pure and fresh blood. His countenance cheerful and amiable. His forehead white and high. His eyes bright and lively. In all his face is full round and enriched with beauty, and to speak without error, such and so like that anyone that hath beheld her might challenge him by the face of the Queen's Majesty his sister.
He has a body strongly made, broad, large, and of the best composition. He appears big under his waist, hath an exceedingly clean made leg, and a delicate fine made foot. To conclude, his proportions shows him to be a man of great strength, activity, and endurance. Such are the marks of the best conquerors.
The apparel which that day he wore was a doublet and hose of a kind of briar-ball-coloured satin, plain, and only cut with a bias cut, the fashion, such as it is at this day, most of request in this kingdom. He wore a pair of white silk stockings and a pair of black Spanish leather shoes. About his arm he wore a fair scarf, and on his head he had a grey beaver hat with a hatband of pearl and diamonds set in goldsmith's work, and a jewel of diamonds, which held up the right side brim of his hat, in my conceit of price not to be valued. So, after he gets past the question of what is tall, it's sort of fine. And I'm sure we've had this mediocrity of tallness before somewhere. That rings a bell. I might do a text search on that another time, but I have a memory of mediocrity. Oh, it might have just been when I was going through the text earlier, but yeah, mediocrity of tallness. It's the king, mate. Careful. But otherwise, he's generally complimentary about them. Exceeding clean-made leg and delicate, fine-made foot. So, any thoughts on that before we start getting actually into the sort of the meat of the detail that we're really here for? Eric?
It just sounds like someone asked him to make a description of like, what was this criminal like? And he just went, well, he's tall. No, actually, he's not that tall, you know. He's maybe, okay, he's sort of tall, but instead of giving like, 5'7" or 5'6" or I don't know, 6 foot something, he just has that elaborate description, which is completely unnecessary but delightful.
Yeah. I should point out we are still a day out from the other account, so I am slightly confused as to what day it is, but that's a minor detail. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, we'll start getting to stuff that is more pertinent to what we're here to do. Okay, we'll go around the room in the usual fashion. On Sunday, being the 20th day of July, all courtiers, even from the best to the meanest, gave their attendance in their best gallantry, the guard in their rich coats, all studded over with studs of gold and silver, and fair gilt halberts in their hands, stood on each side of the presence chamber door to the farther end of the long gallery next to the chapel. The gentlemen pensioners, some in cloth of gold, some in cloth of silver, velvet or satin laid with gold or silver lace, the meanest of all with gilt poleaxes in their hands, armed with velvet, studded with gold, and tasselled with coloured silks and gold of silver, stood from one end of the presence chamber to the other, even to the door of the lobby, which goeth into the privy chamber. And when all things were in a readiness, the nobility and council of England, and the council and worthies of Denmark, going two and two together before the two kings, very rich and in great state, followed through both the former guards to the chapel, where, after prayers ended, they returned again into the presence in like stately fashion, where that day our king feasted the king of Denmark in most sumptuous manner, drums beating and trumpets sounding all over the palace.
Had a hunger-starved wretch been but brought thither to have beheld the abundance of meat, without doubt I am persuaded it would have filled his stomach. Even plenty breeding a loath, and the open hand of liberality stopping the mouth of desire, in so much that many refused what they most craved, because it became so bountifully without asking, and what was most both to be pleased, to be admired and praised.
All this infinite world of abundance was governed by such a discreet and even hand of well-experienced judgment, that there was neither seen lavishment in the expense, nor disorder in the use, but all things discharged bountifully, royally, and without any distaste or smallest show of the least discontent.
So we're getting a bit more lavish stuff going on here. Lots of people in the presence, in their finery. We've got drums, we've got trumpets. So we're getting some music cues in here, and a lot of food. Again, lots of caveats covering the abundance going on here. But I think he's figured out his style now. He's no longer quite so dancing around this point. He's figured out how that's fine. Eric's just asking in the chat, is this the meat? We're not at the meat ship. This is at court. The meat ship's later. We have not reached the meat ship. They have all the things here, so this is probably relatively normal for them to a degree. I don't know how excessive court could be at best of times as opposed to more day-to-day
Well,
stuff.
I don't know about court, but I do know that when James and Henry visited the merchant tailors only 2 years, no, the following year rather, the menus and the food that they bought for the occasion fills up about 7 pages in the merchant tailors account book. Like they're buying small birds in dozens, of things, just random bits of bird and meat. And so this description of them all kind of being piled up on the table so much you could barely tell one thing from another kind of strikes me as being quite accurate.
Yeah, they like their food. They like their food. Okay, we're getting increasingly to the kind of pageantry that we're actually here for. Let's see what happened on the day. We're not quite sure what day of the. Well, I'm fairly certain about the day. It's the date that seems to be out. The day seems reasonable. I'll go back to Tom, then Eric, and then myself.
On Monday, the 1 and 20th day of July, both the kings hunted in Greenwich Park and dined in the White Tower on top of the hill in the park, the Earl of Northampton having the keeping thereof. Tuesday, the 22nd of July, and Wednesday, the 23rd, were spent in hunting at Eltham and in feasting.
On Thursday, the 4 and 20th of July, both the kings with their trains, which contained great numbers, rode in progress to Theobalds. Is that how we pronounce it?
Tybbalds, wasn't it?
Tybbalds, thank you. Tybbalds near Waltham, being 12 miles from the city of London and being in the house of the most noble and worthy Earl of Salisbury. Whereupon the approacher of the King's Majesties, there were many very learned, delicate, and significant shows and devices presented unto them, which I will omit amply to describe because my conjecture may err from the drift of the inventor, and I hold it a capital offence by a slight imagination to misconstrue a fair invention. And there is no doubt but the author thereof, who hath his place equal with the best in those arts, will himself at his leisurable hours publish in best perfection.
Just going to pause there. That's the kind of stuff we wanted. Thank you, author, for not mentioning any of it. I mean, I like the fact that he's got a sense of, I want to make sure I'm not going to make anything up based on poor materials. But it would have been quite nice to know what the learned, delicate, and significant shows and devices presented unto them were at this point. I don't have as of yet. We may have that in other sessions, but as of yet, that's a little detail we don't have. We are suddenly now the dates match, so I'm just wondering if something's gone wrong in the transcription or something, or we're out. But now we seem to be in sync with the other account, so that's interesting. Any thoughts on this? A bit of feasting, bit of hunting, and some entertainment, undescribed. Eric.
It just reminded me of like sort of well, we were reading one of the Lord Mayor shows. I want to say it was Haywood, but I don't think it was Haywood. It was one of the other ones. Where he just went, "I will omit to describe this because it was too vulgar." Whereas this guy just goes, "I will omit amply to describe because it might be different from what actually was intended." It's
yeah, it was Haywood.
Oh, it was okay.
It was Haywood. Yeah, he did it every year.
It sounds like that. Yeah,
it was very annoying. I think some others did it as well. I'm going to say Monday might have done that as well, but I could be maligning Monday just for fun and effect. Tracey.
Yeah, I mean, no reason not to malign Haywood, really. Let's be honest about it. I think what seems to be happening increasingly as this pamphlet goes on is that the kind of the motif or the device or whatever of I'm writing a letter to my friend in the northern parts has just kind of drifted away, hasn't it? And we're now into a much more conventional Dugdale style first-hand account of what it was like and who did what and what they looked like and what they were wearing and what they ate and that kind of stuff.
Mm. Yeah, and the style has definitely settled. I mean, he's no longer tying himself in knots in quite so amusing a way. Bless.
I do think that What Is Tall passage stands out as one of my favourite.
Yeah.
ever in this genre.
I've just got written in my margin, dig, keep digging. Okay. We are coming towards something we actually have text for. So hold on to your hats. I will ask Eric if you can do the song, and Tom if you could be the chorus at the end of the song, and when we get to that. So for all of his saying I'm not going to make anything up, yet to give you a little taste of what came nearest to my understanding, there was at the entrance of the gates planted a goodly tree with leaves and other ornaments resembling a great oak. The leaves cut all out of green silk and set so artificially that after certain speeches delivered and songs of welcome sung, as the King's Majesties passed away even in a trice, all the leaves showered from the tree, both upon the heads and garments of both the kings, and of a great multitude of their followers, upon every leaf being written in gold letters this word, welcome, and upon some twice, welcome. And the better to put your ears in tune, being dulled with this my ill-penned discourse, I will set you down here the Song of Welcome, which was sung before both the kings, on the stanzas by a single voice, the chorus by a whole consort of voices.
If every joy now had a tongue, and all the several thoughts were sung, under this happy roof they could make proof how much they do rejoice in one, the master's voice, and that is welcome still. Hail, double flame of majesties, whose lustre quickens, blinds not eyes. Whoever saw such light would wish for night. Stay, stay, we may rejoice, and keep our constant voice, which is your welcome still. When two suns shine, the ample day should not so haste itself away. Fear to lose destroys almost our joys, but we must so rejoice as we make good our voice of welcome, welcome still.
And would you ever say, and make it lasting day, 'tis welcome, welcome still.
After the two kings, with great state and magnificence, were entered the house, it is not to be imagined but believed that there wanted no means either of devise, pleasure, entertainment, feasting, or what else might glut the heart with contentment, but was there with the most liberal hand, willing heart, and contented spirit poured forth, no man reprehended for giving, but many for not taking. Once again, this whole thing about entertainment and pleasure and how much one should accept and how much to give. So actually, for all his saying, I'm not going to tell you what happened, he does actually say, okay, this bit I remember really clearly because it was really clever. And I love this idea of this tree, this goodly tree with leaves that fall on command. I'm really curious as to how you do that. I've got thoughts. But it's clearly one of those sort of big, lovely, magical little things that everyone remembers. It's really interesting. And then we have this little song, double hail, double flame of majesties. Two bright things, making everyone happy and lovely. It's a lovely little moment, that, actually. I can imagine that going down really well. If the leaves all fall instantly at the same time and they're all done, how is it done? I don't know. Thoughts on the magic tree? Tracey?
My first reaction was, I don't believe it, actually, but I should know. God, I should know how with pageantry, pretty much anything is possible. And the gold thing is a bit that gives me pause. I'm just wondering how they would have written in gold on hundreds of leaves, which I don't know, maybe were fabric or paper. That's a bit of a conundrum. But it must have been absolutely amazing. No wonder remembered it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, how long it takes to set, because it's not that you've got the stage management question of how do you make a device drop lots of leaves. I mean, I can think you could do it with a reasonable number, but how many is it? They do say, and a great multitude of their followers. If you designed it just to fall on the kings, you could do it actually relatively simply. So how that works, Yeah. I'm curious. I'm assuming that all of the leaves are something like that, paper or material or something like that, which would be plausible to get gold onto. Budget's not the issue. It's just how fiddly gold leaf on leaves would be, unless it's gold thread. Is that more annoying than fiddly than to do gold leaf?
Oh God, yes, I would have thought so. I mean, I think we'll probably maybe between now and the next session we have on this event, these series of events, we can have a look at I'll have a look at one of the progresses for James in the run up to this, and see if there's anything similar going on, or maybe even look back some of the stuff for Elizabeth.
Yeah.
This is a song. The song reminds me, or at least it's a song that was sung to Elizabeth when she was at Kenilworth. I mean, there's only so many different ways you could spin "Welcome." We're very go. Please don't ever leave us. They're all going to be kind of similar. But I mean, I think what's interesting about this is that it's that kind of family likeness thing that we're seeing all the time, isn't it?
Yeah. And we will be over the next year or so be doing not just more royal entries and other civic work, but also more of this kind of royal entertainment type material as well. So we're slowly trying to tie all these interweaving threads together. So we were, and then when we come back to texts like this and try to do something with them, we have a fuller picture of how it all works or potentially works. Okay, let us read on in the usual alternating fashion. We'll see where we get for over the next few days. I'll go. Eric, then Tom, then me. We'll go round that way.
We start with Friday, yes.
Yeah, we're on Friday, and yes, it is the 25th, and we're in sync.
Mm-hmm. On Friday, being the 5 and 20th day of July, both the kings went and hunted the stag in Waltham Forest, where the heat of the day, the dust from the earth, and the busy flies in the woods, I think, took from the King's Majesty of Denmark the best part of his delight in the hunting. After they had killed a brace or two of stags, they returned to Tybalt's, where they spent that night, and the next day being Saturday, the 6th and 20th day of July, in private mirth and feasting.
On Sunday, being the 7th and 20th day of July, as if the noble Earl of Salisbury meant to make a distinguishment or difference twixt days, and to crown the Sabbath with the greatest glory, the feast, pomp, and bounty, though the former was almost more than thought could comprehend, seemed even to double in his increase of greatness.
Flesh and fish of all sorts, fit for the use of man, and the most dainty, the most abundant, were so mingled and heaped together that it was hard to distinguish of which kind there was greatest plenty. Each dish that was called up, especially baked meats and others fit to support, had little pendants upon the hatchment of, or arms of England and Denmark upon them, and under, in golden letters, written "Welcome" and "Welcome still."
Many, according to the opinion of the eye, which ever is farthest in love with the last object, held this day's feast the greatest of all other, although the other might well hold a superlative in any reasonable judgment. However, 'tis most certain they were all royal and abounded.
At the king's departure, the Earl of Salisbury presented to the King of Denmark a fair Barbary horse, a fair English horse, a goodly mare, and two dainty tracoons for his Majesty's tawning saddle, all covered with cloths of fugard cloth of silver, richly fringed and adorned.
So it's interesting. Lots of interesting things here. Bit of hunting, lots of stuff about plenty. We've got these golden letters again. And I was just checking the other account. The account of all these larger has the oaken leaves thing there, but it's there was strewed in the highways abundance of leaves coloured green, cut like oaken leaves, which being presented to their majesties, they praised the device. So maybe we're seeing a difference between intention and execution. It's also interesting, I think, in the other account, they basically said on Sunday they just rested and heard sermons. It's not quite what this account is saying. We ate a ton of food. It's what's going on here. There were some lovely gifts. I did like a fair English horse, a goodly mare. Again, it's a sort of weird borderline jingoism thing going on here, but it's not. But it's interesting. Thoughts from the room, Eric.
The bit about the food made me think of the banquet of dainties that we read like ages ago. I think there were only 3 of us in that session or something. And it was kind of that was also about sort of you have to organize a banquet of dainty things, but then you can't, like, sort of, it was about marriage and desire and pleasure, but also not having it, which makes me think that this might be a spin-off of that, which is very strange.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was more sort of intellectual dainties as opposed to this, which is, your literal dainties for the enjoyment thereof. Tom?
Just to go back, the leaves were cut of green silk.
Yes. Yes. Yes, we did actually. It was actually in the text, wasn't it? So yeah, we have that element. Green silk, yes. Tracey, any thoughts on the day's entertainments of the Earl of Salisbury?
Which is Cecil, of course. I mean, there's I suppose the fact that there's this kind of almost a sort of fiction that they all consented to, that this was Cecil's house, but actually James used it as his house. In fact, he loved that house very much, and that's where he died. So much he died there. That makes sense. I think it stands out for me with this section and slightly further on when they get into London is just how many blooming horses there are. I think because a lot of pageant texts are almost entirely silent about horses. And I know this has got a PhD student who works on horses in London, so this is something she's been looking for and not finding it. This is completely the other end of the spectrum. Horses everywhere you look. And I think what it does do is it reveals the extent to which A, being horsed is an indicator of status, and B, how they're part of any kind of procession and the kind of glamour and spectacle and all the rest of it.
Okay, we're moving closer to actual stuff that is our wheelhouse. So let us move forward. But Eric, before we do that,
can we just highlight the phrase, the other might well hold the superlative in any reasonable judgment? Just sort of like, it's like, yes, some people thought it was amazing, but the others were also amazing. So come on.
Yeah, when it's all so good, how can you tell what's bad? Okay, Eric, start us off, then Tom, then I'll take up, and then we'll see where we go from there.
On Monday, being the 8 and 20 day of July, both the King's Majesties after dinner departed in a great state and gallantry from Tybalt, where I dare swear the noble Earl could have been contented to have enjoyed them a much longer season, and thence returned back unto Greenwich, where they spent Tuesday, the 9 and 20th day of July, and Thursday, the 30th day of July, in hunting, feasting, and other private delights.
On Wednesday at night, the youths of Paul's, commonly called the Children of Paul's, played before the two kings a play called Abuses, containing both a comedy and a tragedy, at which the kings seemed to take delight and be much pleased.
On Thursday, being the 1 and 30th day of July, after breakfast was ended, both the kings and their most ample trains took barge at Greenwich, and in the most solemn manner that might be, came up to the Tower at London, landed at the King's Stairs, took view of the wharf and ordnance, and also at the Tower, who then was trimmed and adorned in her best and most warlike ornaments. There was the Lord Mayor of the City of London, the two sheriffs, and almost a world of earls, barons, knights, and esquires met the two majesties. There the Lord Mayor delivered to our king his sword, and received back from our king his sceptre, which he bore before the two majesties. So yes, we're into the bit where we're into where what we're here for. They've made it to London. Stuff is going on, and suddenly it's getting busy. They've had a look round the Tower of London. There is a world of earls, barons, knights, and esquires. What a way to get! What a turn of phrase! Absolutely love that. But the day before, they went to see. They got the Children of Paul's to do a play. I'm fairly certain we don't have it. I'm just going to actually have a quick look at it, because I'm sure there will be an entry for it. But I am 99.9% certain that it does not exist. And I'm just flicking through Wiggins now, and see here that beyond broadly speaking, this reference to its existence is here. I don't know that we have much more. No, sadly, that is all we have on what abuses there were.
It sounds a bit interlude-y.
Well, Children of Paul's, their repertoire does dip into that sort of genre to a degree. Was it commissioned specifically for the visit? Or is it just something that seemed appropriate from their repertoire?
I think the latter is probably more likely.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing I want to kind of throw into the mix is that we're now, well, say we, Matt Stable, is starting to learn the extent to which Marston was really involved in this series of entertainments, the London leg anyway. And he was obviously writing for the Children of Paul, so there may be some kind of connection there. It might be something he was involved in, just maybe doing a kind of an edit or something on a pre-existing play, interlude, something.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Well, it sounds like a Marston play just by the description, containing both a comedy and a tragedy. I mean, if that's sort of going to describe what Marston's producing at the moment, that's sort of very on form. I mean, you've got the Faun from the previous year, dancing about. I'm just having a quick hunt through some other stuff that he might have written around about now, and nothing else that's quite so potentially crossovery. So yeah, it would make sense. I mean, you just tailor what you've got and slightly adjust it. Abuses is so vague. It could actually fit quite a lot of plays because they contain abuses in some fashion, and that this witness has just heard a title that it has been given. But yeah, we are at the beginning of our journey. Finally, we've actually got to a royal entry. And yeah, so landed at King's Stairs, took a view of the wharf and ordnance, also at this tower, and lots of people are there. So good stuff. Okay, I will ask you to alternate. Well, no, we'll go around. I'll go Eric, then me, then Tom, then Eric, then me, and we'll take a decent chunk of text now to get some detail and see how that goes.
This done, the two kings mounted upon two goodly horses of like colour, like plumes all white, and like barbs or caparisons of inverted gold and silver. In like manner, all the nobility and gallantry, both of court and city, were mounted upon great horses, some with plumes or feathers, some with rich embroidered saddles, some with caparisons, some with most costly footclothes, and other men of other fashions being mounted according to the quality of their places, were in a most gallant readiness to attend the two royal kings in their high pomp, clean through the most famous city of London, which that you may the more truly discern the greatness of the state. I will deliver you first the manner of their passage.
first rode some 20 and odd of the Knight Marshal's men for clearing the way, in white hats with green and white bands, white fustian doublets, and green cloth hose. After them rode all our king's trumpeters, sounding their trumpets, behind whom rode our sergeant trumpeter with his mace. After him rode one of the King of Denmark's drums, having on each side his horse hanging a kettle drum, which he beat with 2 red sticks, made like 2 mortar pestles. After him rode all the King of Denmark's trumpeters, sounding their trumpets. Then rode all our king's grooms and messengers of the chamber, after whom followed one of our pursuivants at arms. Then rode mounted on great horses, richly furnished, and themselves adorned in most costly and rich suits, by 2 and 2, all the knights and gentlemen pensioners, and knights and gentlemen our king's sworn servants.
After them rode likewise by 2 and 2 mounted also upon great horses, richly trimmed, and themselves very rich, after the English fashion, all the King of Denmark's gallants and ordinary servants.
And Eric.
After them rode another pursuivant at arms. Then rode all the knights and gentlemen of our king's privy chamber, bedchamber, and places of especial regard. Then the King of Denmark's of like place and degree. Then a herald at arms. After him all our barons and viscounts. Then the lord bishops and their rochets, or I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Rochets, maybe. No. Mm-hmm. Anyway, then the masters of request. Then all our earls according to their places, not being of the council. Then the lords of our king's privy council, and then the King of Denmark's council. Then our Lord Treasurer with his white staff, and the Lord Chancellor with the purse, and the Lord Mayor of the city. Then the Duke of Lennox all alone, then the sergeants of arms with their maces, then Garter King at arms, and all the gentlemen ushers. Then the Lord Admiral bearing the sword, and the Lord Chamberlain with his white staff, after whom rode the young prince, mounted upon a most delicate courser. After him, on the right hand, rode the King of Denmark, and on his left hand our king, about whom went all our king's footmen, in rich coats of crimson velvet, yellow satin doublets, yellow satin hose, and yellow stockings.
Close behind the king rode the Earl of Worcester, master of the horse, after whom followed almost 100 or more gentlemen, the king's servants, and on each side went on foot the King of Denmark's guard of harbingers, being about 100 or more. In this stately equipage they departed from the Tower Hill, at whose departure were shot from the tower and the wharf about some 70 great shot, being all cannon, demi-cannon, basilisco, and culverting, besides the chamber pieces, a great number. At the entering of Tower Street, all the children of Christ's Church Hospital in their blue coats, together with their governors in their liveries. From Tower Street to Whitehall, being near 2 miles in length, all the streets through which the majesties did pass were railed according to the bigness of the street, with rails of framed timber about 20 foot wide, the one side being but a single rail against the which the people and beholders might lean, the other side with a double rail, some half a foot or better from the ground, boarded underfoot and seated within, and both the rails before and behind were all covered the ground with blue cloth. So, a lot of stuff here. The lists between the two accounts, the ones we've done previously and this, broadly speaking, match. We're getting a real sense of things. We've got the whole stuff about the King of Denmark's drums. That was in the other account as well. They were very keen on these drums, these kettle drums. And that was obviously something that everyone thought, oh, that's quite cool. That's quite a thing. Yeah, we'll have one of them. But yeah, we've got the Order of Procession, we've got Prince Henry, we've got the Lord Admiral, we've got all these various people, and a hell of a lot of shot being fired. And of course, all this detail about the barriers as well, which we've had before in other events. And yeah, importance of crowd control, but actually a lot of detail about how they're structured. That's actually really quite helpful. I don't know if we've had that level of detail as to precisely what the barriers actually would have physically looked like. Tracey,
I know more about carpentry that goes into building rails and standings than I think anybody since the 17th century. I've got some primary materials from a couple of the livery companies about exactly this, which we'll come back to. But yeah, I mean, again, this is a wonderful account. The presence of the children from Christ's Hospital was something I've not seen elsewhere. They were probably there just to kind of demonstrate the city kind of being there to greet the kings, I guess. But yeah, it's very interesting that they were there. And the kettle drum bit was wonderfully evocative. I thought I could almost sort of see it and hear it.
Yeah, I have a memory of it might have been going back to Elizabeth or Edward, but there was definitely something to do with children singing in a similar thing for a coronation or a royal entry that we've done before. So I do wonder about sometimes some of the other things that sort of pop up along here. So I'm curious about that.
I'm pretty sure that children from Christ's Hospital performed at livery company halls in the sort of 1560s and 70s at least. So there's some kind of tradition there that we're only getting very slight evidence of. So intriguing.
Yeah. So yeah, we got again a sense of the movement and the departing and moving about and the distance of how far you have to walk, and it's fascinating the little things that these accounts actually sort of zoom in on and zoom out of. It's really quite interesting. So right, where are we at the moment? Where were we? Were we Tower Hill? Where have we moved on? From Tower Street to Whitehall being nearly 2 miles in length. So yeah, which is about right. So yeah, they're making their way. Other thoughts from the room, Eric?
Basically, the bit about the barriers made me think of, I think it was, if you know not me, you know nobody. In part 2, you get this entrance by Queen Elizabeth to Hobbs, or whatever his name is. And yeah, that's what it made me think of, because I seem to remember there was this description of like how well, obviously in the play, of how, you know, like the marshals were trying to contain the crowd and, like, you know, sort of barricade areas and that kind of thing.
Tom?
So what's getting me now is how many is in the train of the King of Denmark? I mean, and how are they billeted from the drummers to all his squires and all his noble people? They have to be billeted in various stations around, and to a degree that warrants their status.
It's a good question. Are they keeping them on the water, or are they're bringing them in into various houses, or how are they doing that? I don't know the logistics on that. That's a really, really good question. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some account somewhere that gives us some idea, but I have no idea. Eric, no, Tracey first, then Eric.
I was just thinking I can ask someone who knows more about sort of royal progresses and stuff than I do to see if. They'll probably say no instantly. Oh yes, well they were sent out to various houses, you know, and that seems likely, but I'll find out.
Yes, was there a system in place for such things? I would have thought they would be used to that a similar level of movement, but obviously you've got 2 kings, so you've got 2 households, and yeah, how many people did Denmark bring with him? So yeah, Eric.
I was just going to mention the whole bit about the crimson velvet, yellow satin doublets, yellow hose, and stockings made me think of one of the masks that we did. I think it was, I want to say Mask of Blackness, but I'm not sure. Like sort of that level of like detail, sort of like Inigo Montoya type detail was very interesting.
Yeah, well, when you've got the budget, then these things, you know, they do. Anyway, we're making our way into the city now, or deeper into the city as we're going along. We're going to carry on. So, Eric, if you can do the next very chunky bit, apologies. Tom, the one after that, and then I'll take on, and then I'll carry around that a bit until we stop.
Within these double rails, thus hung, sat the masters, wardens, and whole liveries of every several company through the city of London, which companies extended their length from Tower Street to Temple Bar, being somewhat more than a mile. Before the rails and before each company stood the bachelors of each several company, in satin, velvet, and other silk doublets and hose, golden chains about their necks, and some pearl chains and white staves in their hands. Alongst the rails, clean throughout, were fastened all the banners, cornets, flags, banderols, ensigns, and pendants belonging to every several company, containing within them all the arms, devices, and honors in any way belonging to any of the same several companies. All the houses in every street through which the two majesties did pass had their penthouses and the walls covered, some with arras, some with tapestry, some with turkey work, some with other ornaments, according to the ability of the dwellers, to the great delight of all judicial beholders, and to the amazement of such as had not formerly seen the like sights. For the clearing of the middle street, in which the kings were to pass, that none but such as were appointed for service might abide or pester the same, there were appointed for the city 2 provost marshals, who mounted on horseback in velvet coats, red scarfs, gold chains, and plumes of feathers, rode up and down. One attended with 8 men in yellow fustian doublets and hose, white hats, red feathers, and red scarfs. The other with as many in like suits, white hats, white feathers, and white scarfs.
To second these were the constables of every ward with several bands of halberdiers, who kept everything in such peaceable order that nothing was seen rude or uncomely. The King's Majesties, in manner before prescribed, passed from the Tower Street down Mark Lane, thence down Fenchurch Street, so up Gracious Street, and then down Cornhill to the conduit before the Royal Exchange, which that day ran with claret wine. Upon the top of the Royal Exchange sat all the city trumpeters, who during the king's passages sounded their trumpets most excellently. Then the kings passed down through the Poultry till they came to the great long conduit in the nether end of Cheapside. Upon the top of that conduit was a model of a fair garden, and at one end an arbor most delicately made in the figure of a square canopy, portraying out in boughs of semblance of pillars, pinnacles, and other embossed work.
This arbour was all adorned with fruits of all sorts, as apples, pears, plums, melons, and such like. Within the arbour was a consort of loud music, signifying, as some imagined, the bower of the 9 Muses. This conduit also that day ran claret wine. From thence the kings passed up Cheapside, till they came as high as the Horsehead Tavern, from whence there was made a scaffold of a pretty height, all lined, hung, and covered over head with blue cloth. In this scaffold sat the recorder of the city, and 24 aldermen, all in their scarlet gowns. But we're going to pause there, because we've taken in a little bit of a journey. The map is as reasonably accurate for this particular royal entry, going along the purple line, and making our way to the nether end of Cheapside. One end, yeah, and passing various conduits, and of course this isn't a Lord Mayor show, so we've got wine on tap. That's the thing about royal entries. That's when the wine comes out, and that's what we're getting here. Thoughts on this so far? We're about to get some details of some interesting stuff, more performative. But I loved all the detail of the various livery companies presenting their banners on the sides of things. Both company display and advertising and all of those elements. Any thoughts anyone wants to throw in? No, there's... Eric, yes.
Yeah, the bit that I found interesting was the part with the claret wine was kind of... I'm pretty sure they used that like in... I want to say Edward, but I'm not sure. It was one of the earlier kings, definitely not one of the queens. No, I mean, definitely not Elizabeth.
No, I think it might have been wine for Elizabeth. I think all of the royal entries we've looked at have, or coronations have had something similar along these lines. But you're right, there was one for Edward, or one of the medieval kings.
But something like wine running in the streets, which was quite like, it was just fascinating. Like, what kind of riches do these people have? Yeah, anyway. I mean, they're kings, but...
Yeah. Tracey?
I'm just going to say, I've just put a link into that famous engraving of Marie de Medici's procession through Cheapside in 1633, and you can see the tavern sign, the Horse's Head tavern sign on there. So it's kind of pretty much adjacent to the Cheapside Cross. So it's just slightly up from the conduit, so you can actually identify where they are really precisely. And it also appears from this text and from something else I've seen that I've completely forgotten what it was now recently, that the tavern was used as a kind of pageant station as well as the conduit and the standard and the cross. That means that part of Cheapside, the kind of middle run of Cheapside, would have been extremely busy with stuff.
Oh, excellent. We need to link in more with questions of what to do with that then as an additional station, because I don't think we've really marked that before in some of our previous sessions. So.
No, it's something I've just started noticing. So yeah, I mean, partly because visual images like that engraving are obviously fairly rare, but this is an extremely detailed account. It's a real mine of information, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's mine a little bit more. I'll continue this rather untidy passage, and then I'll go to Tom, then Eric, and then we'll see where we are. So there's a lot of detail to pick up. We're running out of time, but we're going to try and get it all in. The recorder upon the two kings' approach descended from his seat and made a most famous and worthy oration, which ended. He presented to the King of Denmark a most rich present, as from the whole body of the city. This done, and the recorder taking again his place, the two kings ascended as high as the Old Change, from the corner of which street overthwart the whole breadth of Cheapside was built and raised up a most stately and well-conceited pegu, or pageant, unto the depth and secrets whereof I do not intend to wade, because it is expected to be published presently by the author that made it. Only those tastes that mine eye did gather by the view I will deliver unto you.
First, the middle part between the two arches, for some 10 or 12 foot high from the ground, was represented a sea, with sundry tritons, sea nymphs, and others singing within the same, and music consorting their voices over it, as it were, presenting the Isle of Britain within the sea, and round about, even from the ground to the top, being, as I conjectured, above 40 foot, were nothing but craggy rocks adorned with four most stately pyramids, which, standing on each side the arches, raised from the ground above the top of the arches.
Just over the right-hand arch was Neptune all in blue, with his Triton in his hand and mounted on a seahorse of silver, sitting as in the sea. Over the left-hand arch, likewise, in another sea cave, sat Mulciber, the god of metals, with all such metals this isle afforded, as copper, tin, lead, and such like, mounted upon a dragon, and under each foot a piece of great ordnance.
Over both these arches the rocks rose a great height, and was supported on each side by two great giants, and on the tops of those two rocks stood the arms of Great Britain and Denmark joined together, the one side supported by one of the supporters of England, and the other by one of the supporters of Denmark. Between these rocks rose a great a great height higher, like a head of a fine turret, with the pyramids on the top of all, under which stood the great hatchment of Great Britain, and within it sat enthroned, as I conceived, the genius of concord, who upon the near approach of the kings was by a quaint device let down in her throne to the lower and middle concave, where, setting open her doors and delivering a long speech to the kings, they discovered to their majesties the model of a fair city, and much other treasures. There sat the genius of the city of London, who delivered to the king a long speech in Latin. So did also Neptune. The sea nymphs sang in Latin, and the music was wondrous delightful. The pageant was wondrously adorned with many gilt columns, rich banners, and guidons, and many shields, and sundry learned devices. And there we're going to pause. It's a massive speech. Okay, we're getting a lot of detail here. I don't think the other account really did about what this stuff looks like. We're not getting the speeches, but he's given us a reason why not. They're going to be published. So, and some of this stuff does exist elsewhere, I think. We've definitely got a chunk of Latin. So I'm fairly certain those speeches are sort of there somewhere, and those songs may be there, but obviously it's in Latin, and whether we're going to read that and do a decent job on that. We've got all this stuff about the Isle of Britain. James is very keen on the concept of Britain, as opposed to England and Scotland as separate entities. Stood the great hatchment of Great Britain. That is that an early flag? What is that? What is the great hatchment of Great Britain? I'm curious about that as a turn of phrase. But yeah, we've got rocks, we've got things conjectured above 40 foot. I like the fact that there's a certain uncertainty in what he saw. I think he seems conscientious enough to have, tried to make sure that he's got what he gets right. But yeah, this is a massive thing. Tracey.
Okay, I've just checked back on my correspondence with Matt Stegel about this, and the situation with these speeches is as follows. The Latin oration delivered by the recorder in Cheapside is the one that's in the pamphlet we're looking at right now. Mm-hmm. There is a manuscript copy of that speech in Marston's handwriting in the Royal Manuscript Collection. Mm-hmm. And there's also Latin speeches on the Pegma, which we've just looked at, which is also by Marston. And the short English eclogue at the Fleet Conduit further on is also by Marston. Mm. So going by the fact there are manuscripts in his hand. So I think I'm not aware of any publication actually beyond the text we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
So it might be that either there was an intention to publish it or something, or maybe that the author of this pamphlet was being a bit coy, or I don't know. I mean, we don't know who it is. So it would be very interesting to know who that was and if they had any kind of relationship with Marston, anyone involved with the theatre. Mm. They certainly got an eye for it. They kind of know what they're looking at in a way you don't always get with these first-hand accounts.
Mm. Oh, it's better than Von Wedel. I didn't stay, so I couldn't tell you. There were some nice, pretty dancing girls.
Nice girls.
Yeah. We've got mounted dragons. We've got all sorts. This description is really helpful because we now have a proper description of what we're looking at, as well as the kind of text being performed. And of course, a lot of the audience wouldn't have a clue what the text was being performed themselves. So I suppose there is a certain utility in performing it as it is. Though a translation would be nice. Okay, we need to crack on because we are running short on time. Eric, would you like to be a shepherd, please? Coming up, Tom, you can be a shepherdess, and corresponding gender markers of he and she there. And I'll lead you in, and then we'll alternate as we get towards the end of this bit. So we've had all these learned devices of the Neptune and the sea nymphs. After the kings were passed through this pageant, they came into Paul's churchyard. So they've made their way all the way to the churchyard of St. Paul's, where over against Paul's school sat all the petty canons and singing men belonging to the great cathedral church of St. Paul, amongst who were mingled a consort of cornets, sackbuts, and other wind instruments. At Paul's school door was a little scaffold reared and constructed with cloth of gold, from whence was a most eloquent oration made to the two kings in Latin. From whence both the two majesties did depart, and riding alongst Paul's churchyard came to Ludgate. Thence they rode down Ludgate Hill till they came to Fleet Street Conduit, from whence, as soon as the kings approached, was heard a most excellent concert of still music, which, inviting the two kings to lift up their eyes, they might behold a very fine artificial summer bower of green boughs, divided with crimson curtains of crimson taffety, the top of the arbour made canopy-wise, and hung round about with this inscription: Des nobis hec ochia fecit, and after a most excellent song sung dialogue-wise, containing these words.
Sweet low, vouchsafe once to impart, did ever live so coy lass that unto love was never moved?
Yes, shepherd, she that has the heart, and is resolved her life to pass, neither to be loved or beloved.
She senseless lives without affection,
yet happy lives without subjection.
To be plucked are roses blown, to be mowed are meadows grown. Gems are made but to be shown, and women's best
to hold her own.
The kings might behold within the arbour a fair shepherd courting a coy shepherdess, who had answered him that she would love him when she could behold two suns at one time of equal brightness. When there were two majesties of like splendour, or two kings in one state, with many such like imagined possibilities, which now he showed her were come to pass, approving those two kings, two glorious sons, two majesties, and what else she had reputed impossible. Eric, take up the cudgels.
After these speeches, which held a pretty space, the music played, and there was another song sung of farewell, at the end whereof the king's majesties departed, and so rode along through Fleet Street to Temple Bar, where the Lord Mayor of the city, taking his humble leave of the two kings, and receiving many gracious thanks, had the sword delivered him back, and himself redelivered the sceptre, and so with all the rest of his brethren, who mounted upon their footclothes, richly trapped in gold trappers, came to meet him, they departed into the city.
And Tom?
The two king majesties, in form as at the first, keep on their way from Temple Bar, all through the Strand, so to Charing Cross, and thence to Whitehall. The word dismounting about 7 of the clock in the evening, they feasted and reposed themselves there all that night.
So we've gone from Cheapside, midway along near the cross, to St Paul's. We've made it to Fleet Street, Temple Bar, and now we've made it to Whitehall by the end of the day. Again, we got Latin narrations there. Lots of music going on here, using the Paul's resources that they've got in place there. And then we have this artificial arbour at the Fleet Street Conduit, with the shepherd and the shepherdess, who have this thing about, oh, I won't love you until I see two suns in the sky and two wonderful kings. A nice little conceit. Not overstaying its welcome in text-wise, but I'm sure the music is also beautiful as well. Any brief thoughts on that before we sort of go into the that's it for the royal entry itself, the big thing. We've got some additional bits and bobs at the end of the text. Tom?
Just very quickly, to be plucked are roses blown, to be mowed are meadows grown. Yes, okay.
Well, I suppose that's the logic. I could go with to be plucked are roses blown. I'm not sure you grow a meadow for the purpose of mowing it. I think that might be cart before the horse. Other thoughts? A detail. It's nice we've got some detail. I've got the other account really didn't give us a sense of all of the stuff going on here. It gave us sort of nice outline. I think together the two accounts can be collided and the actual performance text can be collided. And I think we're really starting to get a picture, actually, of how this all fits together. Eric?
I'm just wondering because, like, as Tracey said, it sounds like this person was quite close to whoever actually wrote the speeches. Otherwise, they would have. I mean, writing those down from memory would have been impressive, unless they were carrying around some sort of notepad or something, which obviously didn't exist back then. But like maybe I don't know. Yeah, unless they were a scribe or something, it just seems a bit like. How do you even remember the song you heard like 10 days ago or 20 days ago or whatever? Just wow.
I'm just noticing an inconsistency of location. The other account, I think, is talking about the Great and Conduit in Cheapside, not further down the road. Or is that... No, that's a different bit. No. Oh, no, yeah.
Do you think there might be some confusion between the Great Conduit and the Little Conduit?
Well, they have something happening at the Fleet Conduit, which is separate.
Oh, the Fleet Conduit, right.
So in the account we've just been reading, the shepherd thing is happening. I think that's at the Fleet, isn't it? Fleet Conduit, from whence as soon as the king approached was heard most excellent consort of still music. So that's Fleet Conduit. Whereas for this one, Fleet Conduit, they stay, which was garnished sweetly. On the top was placed delightful music, and were presented with other speeches which were graciously accepted. Whereas all the stuff with the shepherds, maybe it's just that they doesn't go into greater detail.
If there's a discrepancy, I think I'd trust the current text. Because it seems to tie up with the manuscript sources. Not that I've seen them, but from what I understand of them.
Yeah, it's all of the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. So that's interesting. Okay. Okay, let's find out the final bits. We've got some day tripping to go with the royal party, which we had fun with last time, and we'll just read down to the end of the account. So, Eric, take it away. Then Tom, and then Eric, and then I'll take on the horribly long bit to spare you.
After these speeches, which held we read this bit, didn't we?
It's Friday.
Wait,
Friday.
What? No.
It's the next day.
Sorry. Oh yeah. I see. I don't even know what day we're on.
Is it the next day, or is it actually has time passed?
On Friday, being the first day of August, the King's Majesty of Denmark, being attended on by divers of our principal nobility, passed privately to the city of London. Okay, until he came to the great Cathedral Church of St. Paul, being only to be admired for the antiquity and hugeness rather than for his beauty and curiosity. And yet there be some things beyond sudden capacity, as both his stately ascensions and the artificial workmanship of diverse fair windows and beautiful tombs.
Then his Majesty went to the top of the steeple, from whence he might take the prospect and full view of the whole city, whose outstretched limits I make no doubt, but inflame him both with delight and admiration.
After his Majesty had beheld this famous monument, he went to behold the Royal Exchange, which being founded and built at the charges of a subject, may very well be ranked and reckoned amongst the greatest monuments preserved in any foreign nation.
From thence his Majesty went until he came to the Tower, where entering he beheld the strengths, glories, riches, and other ancient monuments preserved within that place, such as I do not think any Christian king or other whatsoever is able to boast of any house comparable to it in greatness, strength, and most strange furnishments. One part of it containing the principal munition or storehouse for all manner of warlike preparations, as ordnance of all sorts, even from the double cannon to the hand pistol, and all things whatsoever which belongeth to any of their several uses. Also horsemen's staves, pikes, halberds, brownbills, bows, arrows, armour innumerable, or what engines soever hath at any time been practised in our English wars. But to behold the infinite number of iron bullets of all sorts and sizes made for the great ordnance, lying in huge heaps, would put an ignorant mind into such astonishment. There is, in another part, the mint, and places for the trial of metals, a thing more than strange to them that are not accustomed to such sights. In another place are all the ancient records, charters, and especial evidence of this kingdom. In another place, the wardrobe, robes usually worn by all the former kings and queens of this nation, where, if one observed the several fashions, embroideries, cuts, ornations, riches, beauty, bravery, and comely plainness, which time hath brought forth, altered, and renewed, it would not only move, admire, but even enchant with the weight of several considerations. But there is another part of the tower, the treasury, or jewel house, which how it is fraught or stored I have heard divers miraculously speak. But because I have not with mine own eyes beheld, I will only imagine it is such, so excellent, and not to be equalled, as well may beseem the dignity and greatness of so rich and famous a kingdom. To conclude, in this house, which is even like a little city, within itself are all the most memorable monuments which any former time have left worthy to be remembered. After the King's Majesty of Denmark had taken full view of this goodly castle, or chief strength of our city, and what else was thought worthy of his royal presence in the city, he departed back to his own court, which then was held at Somerset House in the Strand, and from thence to Whitehall, where he lodged. Tom, then Eric, and we'll close.
On Saturday, being the 2nd day of August, both the King's Majesties rode in the morning to Marylebone Park, where they hunted, where after they had killed divers bucks, they returned to Whitehall, and from thence in the afternoon departed to Greenwich, where they had feasted all Sunday before the 3rd day of August.
On Monday, being the 4th day of August, it pleased our King's Majesty himself in person, and the King's Majesty of Denmark likewise in person, and divers others of his estate to run at the ring in the tilt yard at Greenwich, where the King of Denmark approved to all judgments that majesty is never unaccompanied with virtue. For there, in the presence of all his beholders, he took the ring 4 several times, and would, I think, have done the like 4 times had he run so many courses.
On Tuesday, being the 5th day of August, and the great festival of our King's Majesty's preservation from Gowrie's treasons, the King's Majesty of Denmark ran at the tilt in person, and divers other noble personages, where his Majesty expressed an able and enduring body, how it was governed by an invincible mind, enriched with all the arts and graces due to his high birth and office. There was that day also great bear-baking, bull-baiting, and other sports. There was also great wrestling and exercises of force between Devonshire and Cornwall against Suffolk and Norfolk, wherein Suffolk and Norfolk was reputed to have had the preeminence. Thither came also all the masters of the noble science of defence, but because the day was then spent, they were appointed to come the next morning by 6 o'clock in the morning, being Wednesday, the 6th of August, where what passed you must expect in your next advertisement, these former tastes being all the passages as yet hitherto effected. Bear-baiting, bull-baiting, wrestling, running at the tilts. Yes, that was all in the other account to a greater or lesser degree. No meat ship. I am sorry. No meat ship this time. He hasn't quite gone as far as the meat ship element. No mention of Morocco either. No mention of the horse up St. Paul's. So, but we do have the fact they go to the Royal Exchange and do some shopping, which is we had a lot more detail in Robert's account of this whole sequence, but he dedicated an entire pamphlet to it. It's like he did it in 2 parts. So this pamphlet was all about the shopping and the after event, and seems to have a lot more detail than his account of the actual royal entry. So that seems reasonable that this is less. But they're both obsessed with metals and ordnance. There was an awful lot on the tower in Robert's account, loads of it. The sightseeing part, they had a lot of stuff. Thoughts from the room, Tracey?
Just one final thought. I've got a kind of hunch that the writer of this is a Londoner. There's a kind of degree of familiarity with the places and the organisations, and obviously there's a certain amount of kind of pride as well coming through. It's not just nationalistic; it's more specific. And that's my hunch anyway.
Yeah, because the way he's describing it for this putative northern friend as well. It's like he's being over detailed in certain things, but not because he's not encountered them before. It's because he can explain what they are.
Yeah.
The Great Confusion. Was it a dig at St. Paul's? Because being only to be admired for the antiquity and hugeness, rather for his beauty or curiosity. Have I misunderstood that line? Is it I think it's more that he's turned around. He initially takes it as being big, and its bigness being the important thing.
It's big. It's one of the biggest cathedrals in Northern Europe.
Exactly. But then he's going. But there are some nice little fiddly bits as well. The artificial workmanship of diverse fair windows. So, yeah, I don't think he's being mean. And it looks like the Denmark contingent they're at Somerset House. That seems to be the answer to the question.
That makes perfect sense, because I do know that when Elizabeth came into the city, all the way from Whitehall, probably, or possibly even Greenwich, to the opening of the Royal Exchange in 1571, she stayed at Somerset House the night before. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, we're filling in a lot of details from last time. Last time was very vague as to where, what actually happened during the royal entry itself. We knew all the procession detail. There's more procession detail in Robert's accounts than in this one, but it's still pretty detailed, and they do tally. There is some discrepancy between where pageants happen. That might just be because I'm just scanning the other document and I'm getting it wrong. But I think there's a genuine slight discrepancy as to what order of events were. And we might need to see what other witnesses give us on that, and what other just accounts of things. The more bread and butter kind of texts. Any final thoughts from the room as to this one? Some lovely turns of phrase. Some fascinating details. I'm starting to get a better sense of this one. Eric, any final thoughts?
Just the mediocrity of Thomas. It's just that description was just, yeah. But it was interesting how after that description he settles into like sort of more performy stuff. Once you get to the performance things, it's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing now. So it's, yeah.
What wild guess? The person who wrote this was tall.
Yeah.
Tom, any final thoughts?
Just for the listeners to this, how many other pieces are we comparing and contrasting with? Is there one or two others?
Well, we've done two sessions, which were two separate pamphlets, but they're by the same person. Henry Roberts, which we have already done. Those are sessions 1 and 2. This is just on this one. We have at least one more session of the more performative stuff and some of the other little bits and pieces that we've gathered. So there's definitely at least one more session to do. Might not be a long session. It depends. I haven't quite quantified how much stuff we can practically do, because we've got big chunks of Latin, and as we don't really have any speakers, and there aren't that many necessarily readers, but I might put the Latin up on screen and talk through it or something like that, and just sort of try and piecemeal what actually is going on. That might be an exercise we'll do. So I don't know what the next session is going to look like. But yeah, we've done two sessions on two texts, but they're by the same person.
Thank you.
And say, I definitely feel that at some point in the future we're going to do a sort of conflation of all of these and try and make some decisions, and that's where we're going to go, is try and piecemeal what truth is.
Well, we've got to work out what tallness is first.
And meat ships, yeah.
Yeah. And what a world of earls might be.
Well,
how many earls is a world?
Well, you know, if you need to get, well, it's obviously it's an emporium in the Royal Exchange where you go to get all your earls from.
Earl needs.
For all your earl needs. Yes. So yeah, and yeah, it's just fascinating little bits and pieces, and some actual performance text. We actually got some performance text this time. The first bit is 3 sessions in, we finally got to say something from the day. So you know, that's nice. So
Well, I'll try and get hold of some of the missing text that this author doesn't give because he's too respectful of the sensibilities of the author of those bits of text. See if Matt's got them. I'm sure he will do. And then, you know, they'll probably be in Latin, but hey, it'd be good to have a look at them, I think.
Yeah.
Blankly. What does that mean? I don't understand. Yeah.
Right. Anything else? Otherwise, I will close the session. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We will return in some shape or form. Thanks to all the wonderful readers for all their wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye in most sumptuous manner.